first meeting of the Planning Commission. I would like to inform everybody that if a petition on tonight's agenda involves a rezoning request, the Commission makes a recommendation to the City Council, who in turn will hold its own public hearing and make the final determination as to whether a petition is approved or denied. The Planning Commission holds the only public hearing on a request for preliminary plat and or vacating petition. The Commission's recommendation is forwarded to the City Council for the final determination as to whether a plat is accepted or rejected. If a petition requesting a waiver of use or site plan approval is denied tonight, the petitioner has 10 days in which to appeal the decision in writing to the City Council. Resolutions adopted by the City Planning Commission become effective 7 days after the date of adoption. The Planning Commission and the professional staff have reviewed each of these petitions upon their filing. The staff has furnished the Commission with both approving and denying resolutions, which the Commission may or may not use depending upon the outcome of the proceedings tonight. So, sorry about that, everybody. First time here. Next thing up is if the Secretary could please call the roll.
Mrs. Smiley.
Present.
Mrs. McHugh.
Present.
Mr. Bonjero. Here. Mr. Ventura.
Here.
Caremagno is here. Vice Chairman Long.
Is present. Is here.
Okay, Chairman Wilshaw is absent.
That's correct. Okay, thank you, Mr. Secretary. We can now begin with the public hearing section of our agenda. Could you please read the item?
Yep, petition 2020-08-02-08 submitted by GMRI Inc. requesting waiver use approval pursuant to section 11.03R of the City of Livonia zoning ordinance number 543 as amended to utilize STM liquor license, sale of packaged beer and wine in connection with the operations of an existing full-service restaurant. It's the Olive Garden at 14,000 Middlebelt Road, located on the east side of Middlebelt Road between Schoolcraft and Linden Avenue in the southwest quarter of section 24.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I should have also mentioned that with us tonight from the Planning Department are Mark Tormina and Stephanie Reese. And I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Tormina to take us through this item.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, this is a request to utilize an SDM liquor license in connection with an existing full-service restaurant. Your approval this evening would allow the sale of prepackaged beer and wine products for off-premise consumption. And the applicant in this case, as mentioned, is the Olive Garden, which is located on the east side of Middlebelt Road, just north of Schoolcraft Road in the I-96 Expressway. The zoning of the property is C2 General Business, and in Livonia, the operation of an SDM liquor license requires special land use approval pursuant to section 11.03R of the zoning ordinance. Olive Garden currently operates a Class C liquor license, which allows for the sale of beer, wine, and spirits for consumption on the premises. The restaurant would now like to expand their takeout and delivery services by offering their customers prepackaged beer and wine products. There are two special requirements that apply to the zoning approval of an SDM license. The first is a minimum separation distance between SDM licensed businesses. Section 1103R1 specifies that no other SDM licensed establishments shall be located within 500 feet of an existing SDM licensed establishment. And there are two such licensed businesses within 500 feet of the Olive Garden. The first is Aldi Food Market, which is located immediately to the south of the restaurant. And then the other is the Wine Palace, which is located on the west side of Middlebelt Road, about 440 feet from the restaurant. This 500-foot separation requirement can be waived by City Council. The other is also a separation requirement, and it requires that an SDM licensed establishment not be within 400 feet from any church or school. There are no churches or schools within 400 feet of the subject restaurant. And then at the study meeting, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, we discussed a number of issues related to SDM licensing within the city. We talked about the quota restrictions and those types of businesses that are exempt from that quota requirement. We also asked the petitioner to provide some additional information relative to the percentage of sales that they forecast with the operation of an SDM at this particular location. We did send new data on this. Hopefully everyone received it. Otherwise, if you haven't, Mr. Howe is available this evening and we'll be able to respond. And I apologize. If you give me 1 minute, I'll be able to retrieve the correspondence on this item. You could begin a discussion with Mr. Howe if that's okay. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. I'm looking to see, do we have to admit Mr. Howe? There he is. So I'm going to allow him to talk. Mr. Howe, can you hear us?
Yes. Good evening, Mr. Chair. Patrick Howe, on behalf of the applicant, thank you for having me this evening.
Okay, great. If we could get your address for the record as
Sure.
well,
Attorney for the applicant. My address is 280 North Old Woodward, Suite 12, Birmingham, Michigan, 48009.
Great, thank you. So you heard Mr. Tarmino description. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, just to recap sort of from the study session, this is part of a national program where Olive Garden increased their to-go offerings, and that included the sale of beer and wine. They're currently offering that at all the other Michigan locations. They've been approved by the Liquor Commission for an SDM license for this location, but we're not using that until we obtain all the required local approvals. This is purely to allow for beer and wine to be sold in connection with takeout orders. Beer and wine will not be displayed or advertised, on a standalone basis in the restaurant. There won't be like a little market or anything. So it's really just a complement to takeout orders. I provided the answers to the questions that were discussed at the study meeting. The percentage of overall sales of beer and wine for on-premise consumption at Olive Garden nationwide is less than 10%. And the percentage of sales since this program started in June in Michigan for takeout beer and wine is 0.1% of total sales. So very small number. They will not be using a third-party delivery service to deliver beer and wine. And beer and wine will be picked up by the customer, either curbside or delivered by restaurant employees. A food purchase is not required to purchase beer and wine to go, although that is how it's marketed. Olive Garden has an excellent operating record. I expect them to have, same standards if they're allowed to serve beer and wine to go in Livonia. And I'm happy to answer any questions that the commission may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Howe. I appreciate that. And it did kind of address some of the questions that we had last at the study session. I will open it up to the commission now for any questions of Mr. Howe.
Mr. Chairman, if the commission pleases, I'll read those letters into the record now before.
Well, let's go ahead and do that first, please. Thank you.
Thank you. So the first letter we received is from the Division of Police dated September 16th, and it reads as follows. We have reviewed the plans submitted by Olive Garden requesting an SDM liquor license, the sale of packaged beer and wine in connection with the operations of a full-service restaurant, Olive Garden, located at 14,000 Middlebelt Road. A review of the plans determined that the request does not comply with the prior separation requirement guidelines. The proposed establishment is inside the separation requirement distance of at least 500 feet from any existing SDM licensed establishment. Aldi, located at 29330 Schoolcraft, currently has an SDM license and is 230 feet from Olive Garden as measured from the nearest point on their building. Also, Wine Palace, located at 139371 Middlebelt, currently has SDM and STD licenses and is 330 feet from Olive Garden as measured by the nearest point on their building. They have proposed to be licensed to the building in which existing licensed establishments are located. We would recommend that the Planning Department and the City Council maintain separation requirement guidelines. It is our opinion that these guidelines are good for local establishment businesses and maintain Livonia family atmosphere. That letter is signed by Jeffrey Ronayne, Special Services Bureau. Next is a letter that comes from the Inspection Department dated September 28th, and it reads, the proposed location is within 500 feet of two other SDM licensed locations. a waiver from council would be required to maintain this deficiency. This department has no further objections to this petition. That letter signed by Jerome Hanna, Director of Inspection. Next is a letter of no objection coming from the Department of Finance, as there are no outstanding amounts receivable, general or water and sewer. That letter signed by Connie Cumpula, Chief Accountant. And then lastly, a letter of no objection dated August 31st from the Office of the Treasurer and signed by Linda Shield, Treasurer of the city. And that is the extent of the correspondence. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tormina. Okay, planning commissioners, is there any questions either of staff or of the petitioner?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Ms. Smiley.
Yep, no real questions. I just wanted to thank him, though. He answered every one of our questions from last week in writing ahead of time. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very thorough. Any other comments or questions from the planning commission?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Ventura?
I guess I'd direct this question to either Mr. Tolmien or Mr. Howe. In the event that Olive Garden were to go out of business, what would happen to this license?
It has no value, so it has no third-party value because it's being associated with a Class C license, so it would just be terminated.
Mr. Ventura, I believe what the implication would be with the zoning approval is that that would run with the land. And so a subsequent operator business at that location could then utilize the SDM license and SDM license at that location, unless the commission and council were to place a restriction on the transfer of that of the waiver use to a new user, except under a circumstance where city council authorizes the transfer to a new user. We frequently put that language in place for proposals or petitions where the commission is concurs with a particular operator of a business with a waiver approval, but also is wants to be cautious about how that waiver is transferred in the future to other users.
Thank you, Mr. Tormien, and thank you, Mr. Howe.
Mr. Ventura, any other questions from the commission? Okay. If there are no further questions by the commissions, we can hear any questions, any public comment that there may be. We have, looks like we don't have anybody in the waiting room. So I guess that's, we're not going to have any public comment. So if there's no questions from the audience, we can close the public hearing and a motion would be in order.
Mr. Chair,
Ms. McHugh.
I'd like to offer an approving resolution that the request to utilize an SDM liquor license, sale of packaged beer and wine in connection with the operations of a full-service restaurant, Olive Garden, at 14,000 Middlebelt Road is hereby approved and subject to City Council approval on the following conditions. Number one, that the City Council waive the 500-foot separation requirement between SDM licensed establishments. Number two, that the petitioner shall enter into a conditional agreement limiting the waiver to this user only, with a provision to extend this waiver use to a new user only upon approval of the new user by the City Council. Subject to the preceding conditions, this petition is approved by the following reasons, that the subject site has the capacity to accommodate the proposed use, and number two, that the use of the SDM license will complement the existing use of the subject property and will provide an additional service to customers.
Is there support for the motion?
Support, but are we going to add an additional thing on there that has to come back before council if somebody else takes it over?
That is in there, right?
That is correct. That was, I think, statement number 2 in the prepared resolution.
Okay, then it's fine, thank you. That's the conditional agreement limiting the waiver. Okay, thank you, sorry. Well, I still support you.
I looked at that closely, Carol, before I.
So we
I
have a
couldn't
motion.
find it while you were reading it, sorry.
We have a motion from Mrs. McHugh and support from Mrs. Smiley. Is there any discussion? If not, will the secretary please call the roll?
Mrs. McHugh,
Aye.
Mrs. Smiley,
Aye.
Mr. Bonjero,
Aye.
Mr. Ventura.
Aye.
Caremagna votes aye. Mr. Long.
Aye. Okay,
Passes.
Thank you very
Beautiful.
much.
thank you, Mr. Howe. Good luck with your venture there.
Thank you. Good evening.
You too. Okay, so now we've come to the end of the public hearing portion of the agenda, and we move on to the miscellaneous item. Will the secretary please read the first item?
This is a motion to hold a public hearing pursuant to section 23.01B to determine whether to amend Article XXXI-NP district restrictions of the City of Livonia zoning ordinance number 543 as amended, to expand the list of permitted uses under section 31.03 to include beneficial forest management practices such as the removal of invasive species and selective trail construction in accordance with the city's master parks and recreation plan and non-motorized transportation plan, Livonia Bike Walk.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Mr. Toromina.
Thank you. We are requesting that the Planning Commission authorize by motion the scheduling of a public hearing on this language amendment. This comes to you by way of a recommendation from the Parks and Recreation Commission. They would like for you to consider changes to Article 31 that would provide a little more flexibility in the work that can be conducted within the city's nature preserves. As was read out by the secretary, this would involve only very limited impact to our nature preserves, including trail construction that would be consistent with the city's master parks plan, as well as Livonia Bike Walk, as well as proper forest management practices. We will bring you the full list of items for consideration at the public hearing. What we're seeking tonight is just your authorization to schedule that public hearing. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of Mr. Toromina? Okay. And there's nobody in the audience to speak on this, right? Nobody from Parks or, okay. Seeing nobody else to speak, motion is in order.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Ventura.
I'll offer a motion, and I don't see one written, so I'm just going to offer a motion to schedule the public hearing that's being requested.
Okay. Is there support?
Support.
I heard Mr. Bonjero first, so we'll put him on the scorecard. Motion has been made and supported. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, will the secretary please call the roll?
Mr. Ventura.
Aye.
Mr. Bonjero. Aye. Mrs. Smiley.
Aye.
Mrs. McHugh.
Aye.
Caremagna votes aye. Mr. Long.
Votes aye. So that one passes. And we move that along as well. The next thing on the agenda is the approval of the minutes. Mr. Caremagna.
This is the approval of the minutes of the 1,160th public hearing and regular meeting held by the Planning Commission on September 22nd, 2020.
Thank you. I believe all members here were in attendance. We can show 6 in approval of that or do we need a motion?
Motion, can I make a motion?
Please do. I think that's,
I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes of the 1,160th public hearing and regular meeting.
Approve.
okay. We have a motion.
Sorry, I was jumping.
We have motion from Mrs. Smiley with support from Mrs. McHugh. Is there any discussion? Any questions? And now I think we can safely show 6. without,
Thank you.
going. See what happens. You put a rookie in charge, and we're just making a mess.
Great.
Thanks. All right. I believe we've reached the end of our agenda. We'd like to thank Livonia Television volunteers for their contribution to our meeting tonight. If there's no further business to come before the Planning Commission, I guess we'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Bonjero,
Support.
supported by Mr. Ventura. I think we can show 6 for that as well. So again, thank you to the Livonia Television. Thank you to the planning staff. And we are adjourned at 7:22 p.m. That's like a new record, isn't it?
I think so.
Record for efficiency.
You did great, Glenn.
That's
Chairman Wilshaw